One of the major differences between farmers and their accounting system and basically almost any other business in the world
is done in a shoebox?
well, besides that, but with most businesses, they have to be on what's called accrual accounting, whereas farmers are on cash accounting. So in other words, for a farmer to take income, so let's say he raised a great crop and it's worth a lot of money, that doesn't count for his income yet. Even if the grain's sitting in the bin, the only way it counts towards income is if he actually takes cash for it.
Well, it's the same way with the expenses though. It doesn't count as an expense until you actually pay that bill. You can take the inputs, but if you haven't paid for them yet, it's not an expense. So farmers can adjust a little bit where their expenses and their income comes because, let's face it, from year in to year out, you don't know what you're going to get for a crop. Maybe you had a great crop this year, maybe next year is a total disaster. It allows farmers to income average a little bit because there's just a lot of money involved in farming, and we were just talking about a 2,000 acre farm has to put $1 million just to get this crop. That's a lot of risk that guys are taking. They've got to be able to spread things out a little bit, and that's why the system is the way it is.
Okay, so you're a farmer, it's getting towards the end of the year, you're debating, well, what do I want to do in terms of my taxes? I'll just tell you something that our dad always told us. He said, as much as you can, legally, you want to minimize your income and pay as little tax as possible, and here's the reason why. Because basically, let's say you have to pay an additional $20,000 in taxes. That's quite a bit of money, $20,000. Well, if you can delay that tax bill for, let's say, 10 years, which you might be able to do through prepaying year after year after year, you got to use that $20,000 for 10 years. Well, what is $20,000 worth to use it over the course of 10 years? It's worth quite a bit of money. So this is the whole reason why you want to minimize your income. Now, I'll give you just a couple of quick statements though. You only want to minimize it to a certain point. You always want to be able to take advantage of the lower tax brackets. So the 25% tax bracket, for example, you probably want to utilize all of that. But if you're up into the 33% tax bracket, you know, you want to try to get yourself down as much as you can.
Well, here's the whole thing. You can't go from, well, I made $1 million, but I'm only going to declare 50,000.
Yeah,
that's a little extreme, no, Brian. You're only going to be able to do that for so long.
Well, yes.
You push that much income over 1 year, the next year, you know what, you're going to end up paying.
Okay,
and this is the way the IRS looks at it, because you may say, wait a minute, Brian's crazy. I'm going to get in trouble with the IRS if I do things the way he suggests. The IRS knows eventually you're going to have to take that money. Like, let's talk about...
Not necessarily, yeah, but not necessarily. Let's say you get completely hailed out and all of a sudden you were going to have a $400,000 loss. Well, you've been prepaying. Now all of a sudden you won't have to prepay. Well, this is your method of income averaging.
But let's just say you don't get hailed out. Let's just say you have good crops, but you get 150 bushel 1 year, 170 the next, 140 the next, 180 the next. So it all kind of averages out. You're putting corn in the bin, or you're putting soybeans in the bin, or whatever crop you're raising. It's a perishable commodity. You're not going to keep grain for 50 years in the bin. I mean, some people may try that, but so chances are you're going to have to sell it in a period of, say, 2 or maybe 3 years. You're going to have to sell that crop.
Yeah, you are.
So you aren't going to completely avoid taxes. This is what I'm getting to, is the IRS knows, look, we may let the farmer delay some of that income for a year. He's going to end up taking it next year, or else he's going to have a bad year and it all averages out. It's not like the IRS says these farmers are doing something wrong.
Yeah, we're not accountants, so we strongly recommend you talk to your tax advisor before you make any decisions on what you're going to prepay and what you're going to expense and all those kinds of things. Okay, so now that I have that disclaimer out there, what the IRS has said in the past, and you look right in their rule book, it says you can prepay up to half of your total expenses, and that includes depreciation. So it includes rent, depreciation, all these expenses that you've got. So let's say you had $1 million in expenses. You know what? You can prepay $500,000. So you write a $500,000 check out for ag chemicals or seed or fertilizer, whatever. Well, then you basically get to lower your income by that amount. So lately we've had some farmers saying, well, I think I'm going to pay the taxes because tax rates are going to go up. You know what? Here again, we don't know what's going to happen with tax rates. But all I know is if you could use money for many, many, many years and delay that tax bill for a really long time, that's going to pay off for you as a general statement.
Well, okay, here's the other thing too. For taxes, for most farm operations, their year end is December 31st. For other operations, you may choose to change that year end date depending on what type of legal entity you have. There are many farms that we work with that'll have their fiscal year end the last day of August or the last day of September, because typically harvest for them starts that very following month, and it allows a nice clean break of, okay, here's 1 year's crop, Now here comes the next year's crop and so forth. You have to look at that system for your farm. If you're setting up an LLC so you can have your brother or something farm with you and you can be legal partners, that's one way you may choose to do it. And then you have to look at also, when you're prepaying things, where those discounts are. Like for example with seed. Many of the seed companies will have discounts as early as September if you want to prepay early. So you say, well, I don't want to make all my decisions in September. I don't know where I'm going to be at with my taxes. That's fine. You can skip those prepay dates if you want. But when it comes to the end of the year, December 31st is the date for most of us that we've got to look at those seed companies and say, okay, what's my best deal? And most of those good deals are in December.
Okay.
Get stuff taken care of.
Now, if you're going to prepay, there is something you have to know. You've got to have an invoice for a specific product at a specific price and a specific quantity. You can't just say, well, I prepaid $50,000 for chemical. Nope, that does not count. It's got to be for specific items. But make sure you're working with a dealer who will allow you to change those things later on. And also, the biggest thing I'd advise you to do is make sure you work with a dealer you can trust. I've talked to so many farmers over the years who prepaid somewhere and then all of a sudden the place goes broke before spring. Well, guess what? They had no collateral. They lost all that money. So just be really careful where you're prepaying. And I realize in the ag community, we're pretty trusting people and everything, but these things do happen. So just make sure you know where that money's going and it's safe.
And also talk to a qualified tax professional who can help you out and help you understand these prepay situations and how you can use them in your favor for taxes.
But it's a great advantage that farmers have been given by the IRS, and farmers are one of the few groups in all of America that have been given this advantage. So use it. Utilize that to delay your tax bill as much as you can, but you got to be smart about it and you have to be legal.
Well, if you have some of our Weed of the Week, you may need to be prepaying some chemicals ahead of time because this can be a tough one. We'll show you how to control it coming up later in the show.